Cool. Thanks for showing up. This is my first time at LastCon, so I'm excited to be here and presenting. And LastCon is awesome, so definitely be back next year. I'm sure you all think the same about LastCon, so no, very very cool to be here. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about HoneyPy and HoneyDB, a low to medium interaction honeypot, and then I'll do the obligatory bio slides and introduction. So I'm a senior solutions engineer at Signal Sciences. I'll explain a little bit more about Signal Sciences in a minute, but just a little bit of my history. I've been in the AppSec space for like the last 9 years or so in the financial sector. Started my career in the wild west of networks at a university. So annoyed a lot of people about security things there and did some IT stuff too. I'm out there on the socials, so you can find me out there at those various things there. Cool, so real quick on Signal Sciences, we're a next generation web application firewall. We do things so much better than what your previous experience maybe with WAFs. But we bring visibility, blocking that works, modern architecture so you can scale. So that's all I'll say about that. We have a booth out there in the vendor area if you want to talk to us about that. Cool, so quick agenda, honeypots overview, and then we'll get into HoneyPy and HoneyDB. And by the way, feel free to ask questions. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time at the end to do Q&A, but feel free to interrupt. All right, so honeypots overview. Before I jump into this, I guess by a show of hands, how many are familiar with the concept of honeypots? Okay, so pretty much everybody. Okay, so then also, how many of you run honeypots? One, two. Okay, so like very few.
I tried once in my company with more security, and we had some issues, and I changed my job.
I hope those weren't related. Okay, cool. So I think hopefully towards the end, my goal here is that you'll want to run a honeypot, and there's various ways, and I'll run through those scenarios for running honeypots. But the goal is to make you interested in doing this. So sounds like most of you are very familiar, but just in case for folks in the room that aren't familiar with honeypots, I'll just quickly run through the concept. So, basically it's a computer on your network that's, intended to look like a real system on your network, but it's not. It's there to trip up attackers if your network's been compromised and they're trying to traverse your network. It's kind of like a tripwire to expose the fact that they're there, and then that gives you information about them as well. Or you can use it just to track attacker activity. So there's 3 types of honeypots, really 2. I added the third. So there's production honeypots, and basically what that is a honeypot in the scenario of like an enterprise network or your company's network. It's meant to look like a production system, and it's there to detect attackers on your network. Then there's, yes?
So are we considering canaries, honeypots then this time?
Yeah, the concept of canaries, is there a specific?
No, I just thought a honeypot was like the person is actually getting in and you're trying to see what he's trying to do versus a canary where it's just triggering alarms.
So there's probably different ways to implement it, right? Triggering an alarm could mean that they're already present, right? So, but yeah, it could be triggering that alarm, or it could be trying to see what the attacker's trying to do. And in that scenario where you're trying to observe what the attacker's doing, that's more of the research honeypot. So that could be like, you put a honeypot out on the internet and just like, hey, so let's see what happens, right? Because I want to get information on what kind of attacks are going on out there. Does that answer your question? Cool. And so the third I have there is the Hobbyist Honeypot. So they're just fun to play with, right? I kind of equate it to that guy out on the beach with the metal detector, looking for something. You never know what you're going to find. So it's interesting. So within these different types of honeypots, there's 3 tiers of interaction with these honeypots. So the first one is low interaction. So it's something that's very dumb. Maybe it's just opening ports and listening to connections, but not really, and maybe spewing back some banners or fake logins, but it doesn't really do anything. And so with those low interaction honeypots, they're much lower risk to operate, right? Because you're not exposing functionality that can be exploited. The medium honeypots, medium interaction honeypots introduce a little bit more interaction. Maybe you can submit credentials to a login screen and it'll do like a fake login, like, oh yeah, you logged in. And then maybe you can run some fake commands, or the attacker would think they're real commands, but they're really emulated. So it gives a little bit more interaction with the attacker, so you get more information out of what they're trying to do. But the risk is, not high, but certainly not the lowest. And then the last one, obviously, is high interaction. This is where, like, you may have like a real system. With no emulation, but you just like heavy logging and instrumentation to see what's going on. So they actually run real exploits on those systems, get on those systems and can navigate around them, have free range on them, and you're just monitoring heavily what they're doing. Obviously, there's a lot more risk associated with that because they have control of that system. Cool. So so production honeypots, just to talk a little bit more about that. I see, the value they provide in running something like this on your network is twofold. So first, because there should be no production or legitimate traffic ever hitting that honeypot, when traffic does hit it, it could mean one of two things. It could mean something's misconfigured on your network and it's just, bouncing around the network and hit the honeypot. That's helpful because you can take that back to operations and they can resolve that issue. And then obviously the second one is there's someone actually with malicious actor on your network that's running around. And the great thing about the honeypot is because it's intended to get so little activity, the logs are of high value, right? So it's not like you're sifting through gigs of logs to try to find something bad. It's like you just need one log event and you have something that's worth looking at or worth investigating. So there's value there. And so for the research honeypots, again, this is just kind of for various goals of identifying sources of malicious traffic, and maybe it's you want to discover new malware, botnets or C2 servers. And various attacking techniques. So there's really all kinds of scenarios you could come up with on what you might want to be researching. And so honeypots, you hopefully have a honeypot that enables you to address those scenarios. Cool. So so there's a buddy of mine, Andrew Morris, actually gave a talk basically on honeypots, but it was no budget threat intelligence. I highly recommend you watch this talk. He's done some great things with some other open source tools that are out there, open source honeypots that are out there. And he's, from his experience, he was reversing malware, uncovering C2 servers, and then actually, going into these C2 servers to see what else they're doing. And he talks about how they're, the weak security they have. But then you actually get you could find their repository of malware, and that's great threat information. One scenario he talks about that he had was so he identified a C2 server, he identified the malware, he reversed it, and he saw that this malware was actually being prepped to launch a large DDoS attack against a specific target. And so he discovered that before the DDoS occurred. So he was able to reach out to that entity and warn them beforehand. So that was just very cool. But yeah, you should definitely watch that talk. And this is all in relation to research honeypots. So this is actually something that happened recent. I thought it was really cool. This person is a physicist. He's not really an InfoSec person, but he's been following some of the stuff I've been doing on honeypots. And he reached out to me because he's like a scientist kind of guy. He's like, hey, I want to do some research and try to get some stats on malicious hosts that are out there that will attack back if you scam them. I thought this was such a cool idea, and I was like thinking through it. So I like drew up that diagram there because he asked, how can he do that with HoneyPy and HoneyDB. And we'll talk about, I'll get more into HoneyDB obviously a little bit later. But basically the flow here is he would get IPs of known malicious IPs that are, have hit one of my honeypots, and then kick off an in-map scan against them. And then while he's running a honeypot himself, waiting to see if they attack back. So I thought that was an awesome idea, a good use of research. So he created a Twitter account that you can follow if you want to see how that progresses. So the hobbyist honeypots. That's probably the category I fit into. I do a little bit of the research stuff, but not really thorough. It's just kind of like ad hoc. For me, it's fun. I probably spend more time on the tools themselves than actually doing research or anything like that. So, like I said, it's fun. Okay, so this might be a little hard to see, but that's okay. This is one scenario. I wanted to find an example for this presentation. And what this is basically the data I got out of running a honeypot. So the top screen there is really it's a shell script that someone attempted to telnet into this honeypot. They downloaded the shell script to run, and that shell script was a command basically to pull down binaries from a server. And then so just on the bottom console here, I'm just doing a file on those binaries to check what they are. They're basically all the same code except compiled for different architectures. So it's basically a spray to like, hey, let me pull down. I don't know what kind of machine I'm on, but I'm going to pull down all the binaries for all the architectures and then just run them all and see which one actually executes. So that was kind of interesting. So you see a lot of that out there. If you do a strings on that one of those binaries, you kind of see it's hard to see on the screen, but basically you have some user agent strings. Obviously you see that there because they're going to be making requests and they want to try to look legit. But down here you see like the usernames and passwords that they're going to try to test with to brute force into whatever target system they come across. So one recommendation when you do this type of activity, if you're on your company laptop and they have endpoint monitoring system, don't do it on your company laptop and your endpoint monitoring system because you get an email from your CSO saying, what the hell are you doing on your laptop? And so I was like, oh, oops, shouldn't have been doing that. So yeah, but that was kind of fun. One thing I do want to do, and so I actually might trigger an alert now, but so on this screen, I'm going back to this screen on the very top, there's just this little lonely IP import up there. So I was curious about that. So let's go check it out. I actually had it queued up here. So I'm going to telnet to that port if it's still up. So you telnet to it, and it gave this really weird response. It was like a text. I can't remember the exact text. I was hoping to show it, but basically what it looked like was some kind of custom command and control server that was expecting commands. So when you find things like that, those are fun things to tamper with or fuzz or whatever, because you never know what you'll uncover there. Sorry that demo failed. All right, so HoneyPy. Okay. So let's get into the tools. Okay, well actually before I jump into this, by a show of hands, who's interested in running a honeypot? Okay, cool. So I'm kind of achieving some of the goal here. Great. So HoneyPy is a low to medium interaction honeypot. That's the intention of it. When I put this together, I wanted it to be plug-in based. So it was easy to implement different protocols, services, or what have you. And it's written in Python. So why did I do this? Why did I create HoneyPy? I've always fooled with various honeypots that were out there, free open source honeypots, and while some of them were pretty good, they didn't quite always do exactly what I wanted, or some of them like just required over-engineering. So I wanted something simpler. So that's why I set out to do this, to make something that's easy to extend. So again, the point is try to make it easy to use, extensible, easy to deploy, and all that good stuff. So this is the Twitter account, HoneyPy log. I think I brought it up over here. Yeah, so it's actively tweeting and stuff like that. So the cool thing about this is once I started doing this and just finding things on Twitter related to IPs, I started finding that there were other folks out there doing the same thing, where they had their own honeypots that they were running and tweeting the events to that. So I put together a Twitter list to combine all the ones I could find into one list, so you can follow that list. And then when we talk about HoneyDB, I did something cool with that, which hopefully you'll like. But it's cool. I consider Twitter like a public service announcement system. So this is actually pretty good threat information that you can leverage, right? This is just an example of Slack integration, getting your events into Slack. Okay, some new stuff. Well, not so new stuff and not so new stuff. Everybody loves Docker, right? Yay, Docker all the things. I do have a nice Docker implementation of this. And it's pretty easy to set up. Basically, in the etc folder, you configure the honeypot however, with those config files, however you want to run it. And then you basically run make build, and it'll build the Docker container for you. And so you can deploy it out, with your Docker container. So just another way to deploy it. And Raspberry Pi. Okay, this is something I've been wanting to do and finally did. In prep for this talk, actually. Let me bring this guy up. So this is basically a shell script that if you have a Raspberry Pi, and again, like the cool thing about honeypots is like they're so cheap to deploy. Like you have leftover hardware you're not using, just throw something together. So yeah, Raspberry Pi, whatever, they're 30, 40 bucks, I don't know, but you can, this just makes it easier to deploy, so it'll actually install everything for you, and then you can change some of the configuration of the profiles and things like that. And so this is out there, and actually I wanted to make it public now. Make it public.
Getting real in here.
Yeah, it's getting real. What am I supposed to do? Oh, there's my password, all dots. All right, it's public. So, cool. Yeah, so again, just to make it easier for folks to deploy these things. As I was doing this for the Raspberry Pi, I realized, well, this will actually work on any system. So if you have like just a Debian box, that you have and you want to run it there, this script will actually install everything for you as well. So cool. Oh yeah, I had some fancy video stuff, which is.
So there's nothing Raspberry Pi specific to it?
No, I mean it's really. I mean the only thing is just that the script puts it all together for you. Yeah, pretty much. So just a fancy text console of installing. So you run that -I for install everything. See, non-live demos are better. Too many variables. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, a bunch of text. I can predict what's happening. A bunch of text is going to run across the screen, and then you can yell success. All right, great. All right, so let's get into HoneyDB. Oh, there's one more thing. Actually, I should show regarding the services. So I do put together some pre-canned profiles of like what various systems might look like. So like, for example, databases, like if it's like a database server, if it's a Linux server, a Windows IIS server. So you can just switch those profiles and it'll configure it to look like those type of things. A new one I'm doing is IoT. So I mean, really right now IoT is Telnet port 23, but also there's IoT devices out there that use 2323 as Telnet. And so I'm just looking for, through documentation of stuff to like find what other ports do they use. So can make use of that here. All right, so let's get into HoneyDB. Oh, spoils. All right. Okay, so so I had these honeypots running, and I wanted to basically share out this data, present it in a nice way, because make it useful to people. So I created this website called HoneyDB, and so it does a couple things. And what you see right off the bat is that at a high level, it's giving statistics of the activity that's happening. So you can come in and see what's going on. It's always interesting when you see spikes like that. So when you dig into that to see what's going on there, saw a lot of spikes when the NTP reflection attacks started occurring and things like that. So that's the home view. Down here is view by host. So I present the top attacking host. So you see those IPs there, and obviously the country flags. And then so you can dig into that to see what he was doing. And so I'm actually capturing like the session information. So there's a lot of TFTP out there. And because right now the plugin's very basic, it doesn't capture a lot of interaction from them. So that's actually one of the next plugins I want to work on to making more interactive, to get more information like what are they doing with TFTP, right? So when you look at a host here, obviously you get a breakdown of the protocols. There's also these buttons here that are very useful. They're just lookup. So like virus total is an example. So if virus total has information related to that IP, in this case it does. So it's related to various known malicious URLs and also hashes and things like that. So it's a nice way to, like, if you're looking at this, to verify like, hey, how malicious is this IP? I also call the APIs a showdan, so to be handy dandy. So you don't have to scan to see what's going on with that box. You can at least get the information from showdan because they've already scanned it to see what ports are listening on that box. There's another project out there called Project HoneyPot, and this is related to like identifying spam, bots or machines that are out there. Typically, you don't see a whole lot of information here, but when you do, you have that information. Also new because of LastCon, I added this other tab, ThreatCrowd. This is a great site that I came across recently. So basically what it's doing is it's doing a lookup on this IP to see what URLs were associated with it or resolved to, and also hashes as well. In this case, there's no hashes associated with that IP. But ThreatCrowd, definitely check it out. It's a really cool site. It visualizes things really well. This is not a good example, but if it was an IP that had connections with other servers and email addresses and other things, you'd get like a nice visualized graph connecting all the dots and showing that information. Cool. So over here, if you want to look at the data by services, so obviously you see here, TFT is pretty popular these days. Also Telnet. So you can drill in that way. It's just another way of drilling down in on the data, because then this then shows you all the hosts that were doing TFTP. There you go. And then you drill down and see the hosts again. Cool. So the next, well, let me skip that. I'll go down to this. So I have this other feature called Threat Bin that I created. And actually, let me log in. So basically, as you're perusing this data, you see a host that you're interested in, like you want to look at it more. It's almost like bookmarking for these hosts, right? So you could kind of add hosts to your bin and create notes about it as to like why you were interested into it, so you can come back to it later. Yeah, so it's just a way to collect hosts that you're interested in if you're doing research. And then with bookmarking, adding it to your bin, you have this view where you still have all the session information available, so you can see why it is that you were looking at it. So like here's an example. It kind of rolls off the screen here, but this is actually an example of once someone's telnetted into the honeypot, these are the commands they're running to try to download malware and things like that. So you see all that information. Cool. I mentioned the threat lists from Twitter. This is just a view of that. Nothing too special there. Okay, so what I think is probably the real value of HoneyDB is I've exposed an API so you can actually start downloading this data and integrating it with your analytics or threat mitigation systems to use this information. So basically there's a couple endpoints right now. Bad host, so basically that gives you like the remote host IP, the count, the number of times that we've seen it, or the number of events, so you get a sense of like the activity around that IP, and then when it was last seen. So if you want to age it off, like maybe you don't care about hosts that have been flagged like 6 months ago, you can age it off. And then the next one is the Twitter threat feed. So basically what I'm doing, all that list of all these other honeypots that are out there, I'm aggregating all that data from Twitter and putting it into the database and then putting all that into this so you can access that information via API. And so you can query it to where you get the same information, remote hosts, count, and last seen, but also you can get the Twitter information, like the tweet ID and the text of the tweet. So if you wanted to do something fancy with that, you could. Cool. And then I also have a HoneyPy sensor, so I'm definitely, if you're interested in contributing data to HoneyDB, you can run a HoneyPy HoneyPot and then configure it to use the API to submit its events and data back to HoneyDB. So, the aspiration here is really to, have a community where, people are adding sensors and collecting that data, because that just helps everybody to have all that threat information available. But when I started putting HoneyPy together, I would throw things at it, scanners, fuzzers, things like that, just to see, because I wanted to check my own code, right? Like, did I write crappy code that exposes a vulnerability? But yeah, I mean, that's something, that's definitely good to do. Yeah. So.
Did you find anything?
The only thing I found is there was an issue where it threw an error. It wasn't like an exploitable error or anything like that. It just kind of hung things and then like just messed things up. So, but I was able to resolve that. So.
What framework are you using?
For the HoneyDB, it's just PHP. Yeah, I just like I did PHP programming a long time ago. All these new fancy frameworks drive me nuts, so I just do straight PHP. What database? Is MySQL. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I'm curious. Is this? I mean, I put this out there thinking that people would be interested in this. Is this something of interest to people as far as being able to have access to that type of data? Okay. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So what's next? More plugins, enhancing existing plugins, more integrations. And then more endpoints on HoneyDB for API. And I hope that the next idea will come from you. I'm happy to accept pull requests and things like that. So that would be awesome. Just a slide for some reference if you're interested in learning more about honeypots. These are great books to start with. And then also there's this HoneyNet project where they have a bunch of resources of different projects and different types of honeypots, ranging from like client-side honeypots to server-side honeypots to SCADA honeypots and things like that. Help, yeah. So this is pretty sad. My honeypot actually has more followers than I do. So please follow me because it's pretty sad. I need help in that area. And actually, LastCon's been great because people have actually been following more so on LastCon. So yeah, please help. I think one of the first steps, obviously, it's not like an open API. You have I can shut down an account if it's like just blasting with data or bogus data. But yeah, I think with any threat information feed, you have that risk, right? Like how do you validate these IPs? And that's why there's aging, right? Like you want the timestamp so you can age them out. But also, I mean, it's more manual, but that's also why I have those other features on HoneyDB where you can click those other sites to see what they know about those IPs and kind of validate. But yeah, that's always a risk and a problem. And we'll see, like, so we'll see if that happens, if this gets more attention.
Can you share the slides on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I will.
Also be Twitter, so
Yeah, you got to follow me, and then I'll post them on Twitter. There you go. Yes. Java. Nice. Cool. Any other questions?
More questions? All right. So
Well,
that's end our session.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and happy honeypotting.